This story takes place in France. The main character of this story is named Lydia Guardo. She was born on November 13, 1960, in a town called Maison-Alfort, located in the Val-de-Marne department, just 9 kilometers from Paris. To begin this story, we have to go back in time. Lydia's future parents, Raymond Guardo and his fiancée Jacqueline, got married in 1956. In the first years of their official union, they had 2 children, a boy named Bruno and his sister Nadia. At first glance, the newly formed family seemed perfectly normal by all appearances. However, sometime after Nadia's birth, her father Raymond was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison for armed robbery. While the man was serving his sentence in jail, his wife Jacqueline started a whirlwind affair with another man, which resulted in her becoming pregnant. During one of the permitted visits, Jacqueline informed her husband of the pregnancy, making it clear that the child was not his. Despite this, Raymond reacted to the news with understanding and expressed his desire to acknowledge the child, even though it was the result of his wife's extramarital affair. Soon after, a baby girl was born, and they named her Lydia Guardo. Years later, when Raymond was released from prison, he almost immediately broke off relations with his wife Jacqueline, who was now left alone with 3 children. Apparently, Jacqueline didn't have much affection for her offspring. As a result, she made the decision to place them in the care of a social organization, which soon found them a foster family. According to reports, the children were lucky. They were placed with a family that not only loved them as their own, but also provided everything they needed to start a new chapter in their lives. Despite the support they received, Bruno, the eldest child, always held on to the hope that his biological parents would come for him and his sisters. Moreover, he even gave his sisters hope that one day it would happen. While still in prison, Raymond saw an ad in the newspaper about a matchmaking woman named Lucienne Ulpat, and he responded to it. Soon a relationship developed between him and Lucienne through letters. After his release, Raymond found this woman, and not long after, he married her. After the wedding, Raymond became obsessed with the idea that he needed to get his children back, by any means necessary. One night, with a gun in hand, Raymond broke into the home of the family that had his children. Hearing the commotion downstairs, the girls were terrified. Nadia barely remembered what her father looked like, and Lydia didn't know him at all. To them, it seemed like he was some kind of monster, perhaps even a cannibal, coming to eat them because they hadn't gone to sleep in time. In the end, Raymond managed to take the children from the foster family and put them into his car, despite the resistance from the homeowners, who threatened him with the police. There is no record of Raymond facing any legal consequences for his actions. It's possible that the foster family was simply too afraid of him and didn't report the abduction to the police. After several hours on the road, the man finally brought his children home. There, he introduced them to Lucienne and told them that she was their new mother, which meant they would now have to obey her. It seems that the first few years of their life together were relatively peaceful, at least judging by the family photos taken during that time. The family moved to a new home, located in a quiet and cozy place. Raymond received financial assistance and was developing his own business, offering instant printing of greeting cards for all occasions, as well as various stationery products. Lucienne also occasionally worked in her husband's company, but for the most part, she handled office duties. As time passed, however, family life began to change drastically. The slightly older children started experiencing cruelty and physical abuse from their father and stepmother. The first thing Lydia remembers from that time is how Raymond beat her brother Bruno for playing with the neighbor's child. When the Guardo couple went to work, they hired young girls to watch over the children. But when Raymond returned home, he would force these girls to drink alcohol with him. Once, he even tried to coerce one of the girls into intimacy, but she managed to escape. Later, the girl's father came to the house to confront Raymond, and in the end, he seriously injured him. After that, Raymond never hired nannies again. Some time after this event, Raymond purchased a trailer to take his family on a seaside vacation. Once they arrived, the Guardo family, like many other vacationers, spent their days lounging on the beach and swimming in the ocean. But then, something unsettling happened. Something far from normal. While in the water, Raymond approached his daughter Nadia and held her unnaturally close. The girl tried to break free from his grip, but this only seemed to encourage him. From that moment forward, Nadia became the target of Raymond's disturbing desires. Lydia recalled one night, hearing her sister's desperate cries, "Please," echoing from inside the trailer. That was the beginning. Raymond committed his first assault on one of his daughter's innocents. From that point on, frequent beatings and far more horrific actions from the Guardo couple became a regular occurrence. Bruno and Nadia stopped attending primary school, while Lydia, she didn't even know what a school was like. She endured the harshest treatment, possibly because she wasn't Raymond's biological daughter. Several years later, around 1971, when Lydia was just over 8 years old, the real torment began. The first recorded act of violence was committed by Lucienne. It seemed to have been triggered by Lydia getting dirty while playing outside. In response, her stepmother placed her in a bath filled with scalding water and bleach. Lydia later recalled how her tender skin started peeling off immediately, floating to the surface of the water. Hearing the girl's piercing screams, Raymond ran into the bathroom and pulled Lydia out of the water. He laid her on the bed and attempted to soothe her burns with vegetable oil, but soon realized the extent of the damage. In the end, they had no choice but to take her to the hospital. It was later confirmed that Lydia had suffered severe third-degree burns. In an attempt to deflect the blame from his wife, Raymond accused the local authorities, claiming they had provided water that was far too hot. Meanwhile, the little girl was transferred first to the ICU and then to a specialized burn unit in Lyon, where she remained for several months. During this time, Lydia had to endure several skin graft surgeries. Raymond was constantly by her side, but not out of fatherly concern, no. His presence was to ensure that Lydia would not reveal the truth of what had really transpired. Eventually, Raymond became weary of the hospital. He declared that he would be taking his daughter home and that her recovery would continue there. The doctors, who had been closely monitoring Lydia's condition, disagreed with this course of action. However, Raymond managed to get their family doctor to issue a note, stating that he would personally oversee Lydia's ongoing treatment. With this, Raymond took Lydia from the burn unit and carried her home. Once there, he did indeed treat her, bathing her regularly, changing her bandages. But at the same time, he began to touch her inappropriately. One day, Raymond came home with a camera, claiming that he needed to send some pictures to the insurance company. First, he took a photo of Lydia, asking her to smile. Then he proceeded to take several inappropriate pictures of her private area. Shortly after, Raymond approached his youngest daughter again, telling her that the family doctor had prescribed her to inhale ether. He forced her to breathe it in. After this, Lydia found herself in a hazy, half-conscious state. She was aware that her father was about to do something wrong, something painful. It was then that Raymond committed his first assault on Lydia's innocence. During this period, Raymond's wife, who was constantly by his side, not only failed to stop him, but even urged him on. Lydia was nearly 9 years old, and she started to think that what was happening to her was normal. She believed that her father loved her, so his actions couldn't possibly be wrong. Years later, during an interview on a French television program, Lydia described how her father rationalized his monstrous behavior. She said he told his children that he did those things for their own good. Among other things, he claimed that as their father, he had the right to do whatever he wanted. In 1975, the Guardo family relocated to a village called Colomb in the Seine-et-Marne department, about 40 kilometers from Paris. In their new home, the abuse from Raymond and his wife continued. The children still didn't go to school and barely interacted with the outside world. Back at work, Raymond managed to get permission to park his printing van in a shopping center's lot. To attract attention to his business, he displayed photos of Lydia's burned legs, which were almost entirely scarred. Alongside these photos were posters claiming that Lydia had been burned due to the negligence of the authorities, who still hadn't compensated her. By doing this, Raymond created the image of a father crying out for justice, seeking public sympathy. Exploiting the pity of onlookers, he easily sold his products and stuffed his pockets with money. The first to decide enough was Bruno. Once, he and his sisters had already tried to escape, but they were quickly found and punished. However, after that failed attempt, the 15-year-old boy, who had suffered years of abuse, finally managed to run away. Yet, despite his brave effort, the authorities didn't seem interested in investigating further. Meanwhile, the young man's sisters continued to suffer under their father's twisted obsessions. As the girls matured and began to develop breasts, Raymond took notice and began binding them tightly with elastic bandages. He wrapped them so tightly that his daughters could barely breathe. Over time, the bandages became filthy rags, as he forbade them from removing them for months. He didn't want anyone else to notice his daughters, not anyone but him. Years later, Bruno reappeared. The now-grown young man came back for his sister Nadia, who had already reached adulthood by then. He managed to rescue her, but Lydia remained trapped in danger. Her room had become a dark, damp attic, where Raymond, without fear or hesitation, unleashed his twisted fantasies, tormenting her up to 3 times a day. Lydia never forgave her sisters or her brother for leaving her behind. She didn't accept her fate and made numerous attempts to escape from the house. However, her father had spread rumors that his youngest daughter was mentally ill, so when she sought help from the authorities, they simply returned her to him. After one such escape, Raymond chained her up. When Lydia turned 18, her father decided it was time for her to bear his children. He was so obsessed with this idea that after each act of abuse, he tied her legs together, supposedly to increase her chances of getting pregnant. At 19, Lydia became pregnant for the first time. Nearly the entire 9 months of her pregnancy, she spent in chains, as Raymond feared she might try to abort the baby. Lydia gave birth to her first child on December 8, 1982, a boy named Raymond, after his father. Despite everything, Lydia never gave up trying to escape, but each time, Raymond caught her and punished her even more cruelly. Once, she was locked in the attic for 6 whole months. During that time, her father and stepmother repeatedly tormented her, often using whatever objects they could find, even kitchen utensils. Rats had become the girl's only friends. After the first child, 5 more followed, born between 1986 and 1996. According to some reports, the last child, a boy named Rudy, was not Raymond's son and was conceived by Lydia during one of her escapes. The children, of course, were a source of great pride for their vile father. At first, they didn't even know who their real mother was. Neighbors, grocery store owners, and even local authorities came to greet the head of the large family and pay their respects. Raymond, in turn, didn't hide the true origins of his children. It was almost like an open secret. Each time Lydia was ready to give birth, the man would drive her to a hospital outside their district and, under the threat of death, forced her to say that he was her partner and the father of the children. Raymond knew exactly how to manipulate the girl, and Lydia simply didn't have the strength or the means to resist him. The end of this story came in 1999. Raymond Guardo, being diabetic, started to become seriously ill. In general, he had never taken care of his health, but this time the situation quickly worsened, and several toes were amputated from his left foot. After the surgery, the man once again ignored the doctor's recommendations, which brought him to a critical state. One day, Lydia came to visit him in the hospital, only to be told that he had died the previous night from a pulmonary embolism. Hearing this news, the girl broke into tears, as if, in an instant, she forgot everything that had happened to her because of the deceased. Later, Lydia couldn't explain the reason for such a reaction to the death of the man who had tormented her for so long. Perhaps it was because, despite everything, Raymond had been the only constant in her miserable life. Leaving the hospital building, the girl remembered how Raymond once made her swear that she would end her life immediately after his death. It seems that years of control imposed by the now deceased man had deeply affected Lydia's mind. She reached the nearest bridge. Without a second thought, she jumped into the river. As she fell, she lost consciousness, and when she came to, she was surrounded by rescuers who had pulled her out of the water. In that moment, she realized that the horrors of her past were finally over, and so ended a story filled with abuse, aggression, and captivity, a nightmare that lasted 28 years. Lydia was finally free, but to her own dismay, she felt no satisfaction from the justice that had befallen Raymond. After her liberation, Lydia faced more trials. Illiterate and unemployed, she had to rebuild her life from scratch. Moreover, she had to reconnect with her children, who had been raised by her father and stepmother, having no contact with her at all. Thankfully, after years of ignoring the situation, the authorities finally offered their support. Lydia was initially allowed to live in the house where she had been imprisoned, though she couldn't bring herself to go up to the attic, the place where she had endured unspeakable torment. Lydia's stepmother, who was 68 years old at the time, only faced trial in 2007. Unfortunately, justice didn't prevail in her case. The elderly woman was sentenced to a mere 3 years of probation for failing to stop the abuse she had witnessed. This sentence was later appealed and increased to 4 years of probation. In 2008, when the media was losing its mind over another case of a woman held in long-term captivity, Lydia finally found the courage to share her own story. She was still illiterate, but with the help of journalists and writer Jean-Michel Caradec, she was able to publish a book where she detailed her painful journey to freedom. Among other things, in her book, Lydia criticized various government agencies that, according to her, sent her back to hell after her escape attempts without even trying to understand the situation. She paid special attention to her stepmother, a woman who, throughout all those years, not only stood by but also actively participated in acts of physical aggression against her and the other children. Medical workers also didn't escape Lydia's criticism. She described how they often treated her injuries, burns, bruises, and cuts, but turned a blind eye to the obvious signs of abuse, preferring to stay out of it. For the same reason, Lydia blamed her neighbors. In her opinion, these people heard the children's screams daily, but despite that, never dared to contact any social services to investigate their home. Finally, Lydia condemned the entire French justice system for delivering what she called a ridiculously lenient sentence to her stepmother. After the book's publication, the public became aware of the horrors she had endured, and at that moment, Lydia declared that she finally no longer felt alone. She noted that while writing the book, some people advised her not to share everything that had happened, saying that it was too personal. But Lydia believed that victims of such crimes must tell their stories, because by doing so, they could save others. In 2014, a book titled Ordinary was published by anthropologist Léonore Lesesne, an associate of the National Center for Scientific Research in France, one of the most prestigious institutes in the world. In this publication, Léonore discussed Lydia's case, based on a year-long ethnographic study conducted in the town of Cologne, where the main events took place. Léonore attempted to understand why none of the residents condemned Raymond's actions or reported the abuse to the authorities. Perhaps the answer was hidden in a phrase spoken by one of the interviewed locals. When asked by the author why they hadn't intervened, the person replied, "In my opinion, what happens behind closed doors should stay there." Sometime after Lydia gained her freedom, she met a man named Sylvain Surla. Sylvain, it seemed, was the person who came into her life to heal her soul from deep pain. Not long after they met, the couple got married, and they had 2 children. Lydia said she found hope in her husband, meeting the love of her life. She gave a few more interviews to the media and participated in the creation of several documentaries about her story. Sylvain always accompanied her, though she tried not to make her relationship too public. Still, she lives with the indelible memories of her captivity. Moreover, she is constantly reminded of it by the scars on her body. In the late 2000s, with the support of a lawyer, Lydia appealed to a compensation commission to receive the payments due to victims of crime. In her appeal, she claimed that, aside from the torture and abuse inflicted by her guardians, she was also deprived of the opportunity to get an education, which undoubtedly made it harder for her to find a job. Additionally, she wasn't even registered in the social welfare system because she still couldn't write, meaning she couldn't fill out the necessary forms on her own. Among other things, her appeal stated that the burns she had suffered in childhood left her with a certain degree of disability. For Lydia, it was crucial to receive a few things. First, legal recognition of her status as a victim. Second, she wanted state funds to buy a house so she would never have to return to the place where she had been tormented. Third, she sought both the opportunity and the financial means to pay for individual lessons as part of a general education program. On November 16, 2009, it was announced that the commission had awarded Lydia a sum of 100,000 euros. Compensation was also provided to the children she had with Raymond, it was revealed that all of them had found stable jobs, rebuilt their lives, and started their own families. Today, Lydia is 61 years old. Her journey to a normal and fulfilling life was long and difficult. Her scars, both emotional and physical, required specialized treatment for a long time, but with her husband's support, she was able to start living again. She has always presented herself as a strong and joyful woman, despite everything. Later, she reconnected with her brother and sister. However, by her own admission, she still holds anger towards Bruno for not taking her with him back then. Every day as she opens the front door of her own home, she takes a deep breath, and with a heavy heart, she remembers the time in her life when that door couldn't be unlocked.